How's it going, Ghostlings? My name is Ghost Aniki, and welcome back to Tabletop Talk, where we talk everything TTRPG. Today, we're back with another book review, this time Obojima, Tales of the Tall Grass. As we did with the previous book reviews, we're going to be looking at the book's general information, who published it, the lead designers, artists, things like that, kind of the story behind the writing and producing of the book, any connected works that they're currently working on or that have been released, and just kind of general information about the book. We're going to be looking at the pros and cons I found with the book as I was reading through, as well as my notes that I took while reading through the book. And we're going to end off with my personal rating of the book. This is going to include ratings for art, the stories, how easy it is to read and how organized it is, how reminiscent it is of the inspirations that it says that it took from, the mechanics it either adds to or changes or removes from kind of standard D&D or TTRPG play, the enjoyment I had while reading the book, and then my overall rating. Each one of these is going to be scored out of 10, and for the overall, I'm going to take the average of that, and everything's going to be rounded to the nearest number. For brevity's sake, I'm going to be referring to it as just Obojima from here on. Just note that the full name is Obojima Tales from the Tall Grass. It was first printed in November of 2024, with further print and PDF releases going throughout 2025. It was released by 1985 Games under lead designers and writers Adam Lee, Ari Levitch, and Jeremiah Crofton, with the art director being Jeremiah Crofton, along with a group of rules developers, editors, illustrators, designers, consultants. Just like any other previous book, it had a full team working behind it. They created something really cool. It was a whole group effort. It was backed on Kickstarter by 23,416 individuals and a group of community build winners, and it uses the Wizards of the Coast D&D 5.1 rules as its base. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't use other rule settings for your story that you write for Obojima. It'll just take a little bit of extra work to adapt it to whatever set of rules that you're using. But it was based on the 5.1 rule set for D&D. More information on Obojima and its team can be found on YouTube and TikTok under the name Obojima. They release short videos and long-form videos regarding the stories of Obojima, the writing, the work behind it, and their future projects. Speaking of, they do have 2 future projects currently in the works. They have a new board game and a new book in the works that are currently on Kickstarter. The name of the board game is Yanari the Witch's Market, and the next book is Obojima Tales from Yataman. Tales from Yataman is a connected story to Obojima. It expands on the main threat within the world of Obojima, as well as providing new locations, new mechanics, character creation aspects, things like that. Both of these are on Kickstarter currently. You can pledge to them. They have several different tier pledges or pledge tiers with different rewards and different things you get once the book and board game are released. But those are the current projects that Obojima and 1985 Games are working on. Before getting into the pros and cons, there are some notes to keep in mind as you're looking into Obojima to determine if it's something that you want to play with your party or look into. First, like I stated, the second book is currently on Kickstarter under development. It states at the end of the first book, at the end of Obojima, that the larger themes, such as the corruption, which is the main kind of driving force in the overarching story of the book, will be explored and developed more in subsequent books. So if you're looking at it and you're thinking, well, it doesn't really explain a lot behind the corruption or behind these other themes, they are intending to explore them a bit more in subsequent books. They explain in the book that you shouldn't kill off the corruption. You should just drive it off, as it will make reappearances in different ways. And so a lot of these themes will be explored further in subsequent books. There are 3 adventures at the end of the book that could be one-shots or developed into their own campaigns. There are also story adventure hooks given with each area description that could be used for side quests or full adventures. So if you are someone who doesn't like to write your own full campaigns, you're not much of a home brewer, and you like things to be almost like modules, this has a lot of options for you. They may take a little bit of expanding on depending on your party and what your party wants to do, if they want to run a longer campaign or a one-shot, things like that. but there are options that you can run off of for your own campaigns or one-shots. The next note, most mechanical components of the book can be adapted into other worlds and stories. Like I said at the beginning, the book is based on the 5.1 D&D rule set, but with work and time, it can be adapted to whatever rule set you're following, whatever world setting you're following. You can adapt it, you can throw things in. It just kind of depends on how much work you want to put into adapting each component. The final note to keep in mind is that the setting of the book lends more to roleplay than it does to combat, but both are possible. So if you're looking at the book as a possibility and your party wants something that is more combat focused and it has more combats in the stories and in the side quests that it presents, you may want to look at something else that has more of that focus. Obojima does have some of that, but combat is not the focus. Its focus is roleplay because of its Studio Ghibli inspiration. Like I said, you can have combat, but it even mentions in the book that, going out and overtly, completely taking out these enemies may not really fit with the story themes. It encourages creative ways of solving conflicts and solving these puzzles and things like that. It's very puzzle focused. It's very solution focused as opposed to combat. So if that's something that your party is into, definitely check this out. But that is something finally to keep in mind as you're looking at this book as a possibility. Now on to the pros and cons. I'm going to be honest, finding pros for this book was so easy. I loved everything about this book. In fact, I had to kind of cut back on my pros just to make sure everything was organized and it wasn't running long or anything like that. First pro, it reflects its inspirations very well. It takes inspiration from the Studio Ghibli line of movies and the Legend of Zelda franchise, and you can see that abundantly throughout the whole thing. The pictures and the stories all look like screen grabs or elements from the Studio Ghibli movies I've watched, and how the characters interact and their backstories are very similar to Legend of Zelda and how you interact with the NPCs. It's not quite as combat heavy as Legend of Zelda is typically, but in its interactions and the social aspect, it very much does show that inspiration. The next pro is the potions and magic items in the world. Both are given kind of a new twist on what you typically expect from D&D potions and magic item lists. With the potions, you have this whole list of ingredients that you can find in the world and combine to develop the different potions. All the potions are beautifully illustrated and have really creative effects, and how they interact with the player also depends on how many you've already had within a certain time period. Each potion has a different focus on what it does, combat, utility, or whimsy. Some of them are just fun. Some of them might have weird roleplay based effects. Some of them may just be useful, helpful potions. They all fit into different rarities and different strengths and weaknesses. It's really cool. And then when you look at the magic items, and really just the items in the world in general, they're all based on 80s and 90s analog tech. In the book, they call this first age tech, and they're all based on, cassettes and Rubik's Cubes and VHS and vending machines. Wizards will put potions and magic items into vending machines guarded by their familiar that you can then buy. The different magic items will allow maybe for you to use different spells once a day or something like that. Scrolls, magic scrolls are no longer scrolls. Wizard spell books aren't books. It's cassettes and cassette players and any sort of technology that can keep that information within it. And they've created new spells to interact with that. You can bring a magic item back to life by using the spark spell, and you can fix up magic items of certain magic items, I should say, using your mechanics and salvage abilities. There's a whole new interaction with magic items and spells and magic in general that the world presents that is very well developed and very well detailed. The next pro is how the people and places and things all interact within the world of Obojima. The world building connections all fit very well together in a way that makes it feel like it could be a real world. You're on an island that has villages scattered throughout it, and yeah, the villagers interact with each other, they trade with each other, they have, their social connections and social interactions and things like that. You have your factions. They all interact in a way that makes it feel like a real island. It's very well developed in terms of the stories and histories behind each village and their histories with each other. You know, some of them, like the others more, they have their different arts, they have their different focuses, what they bring to the island. The connections are really well developed and make the story really come alive for the players. The next pro is how the world is set up in terms of campaigns and stories. Pretty much any kind of campaign length you want can be done using Obojima. If you want a longer campaign, you can adapt the stories and story hooks or the adventures in the back of the book to fit into a longer campaign, or just develop those stories out more. I know for my personal campaign that I wrote for Obojima, I used a lot of the adventures and campaign and story hooks found in the descriptions of each location as stories that push mine forward and interact with mine. Or you can just leave them as is, and you have multiple options for one-shots that you can come back and revisit at times. You know, you may play a one-shot for Obojima one day, go through a full campaign or, you know, part of a campaign, and do another one-shot from Obojima as kind of a break from what you were doing. Any kind of campaign length you want can be done with Obojima because of how many story opportunities it has. The next pro on the list kind of bounces off of that one, and that the world and art and stories are very engaging and interesting. Each story hook and adventure ranges from something that could be seen as trivial but is really important to the NPCs, all the way up to something that affects the whole island. The NPCs all have different interactions with other NPCs and their own little backstories and side things that they are focused on that really keep the reader in it. Not every NPC is going to be very focused on the big bad, the corruption, the thing that is affecting certain parts of the island. Not every NPC is going to be focused on that. They're going to be focused on what they're dealing with. And in that, it keeps the reader from focusing entirely on this big threat, and focuses on, oh, well, this NPC has this going on, and this village has this and this and this, and it keeps the interest up. The final pro on the list, again, kind of flows from that. It's a continuation, in that some aspects of the world are left open-ended enough for individual interpretation and use. You're able to rework and adapt certain mechanics from the book into other things without it, you know, having to change your own story or change the mechanics that you're using in your story or whatever you're working on. Example being the shield mechanic that Obojima presents is something that can very easily be thrown into just about any TTRPG setting I can think of. The pacify status is another thing that you could throw into another D&D campaign without it affecting your story or your mechanics. Same thing with the salvage and mechanics abilities. There are a lot of mechanics that can be taken, and with a little bit of reworking and a little bit of attention given to them, you can put them in just about any story setting that you have, which is really cool, and it gives a lot of opportunity for aspects of Obojima to merge into other books very easily. Because the pros were so easy to find, the cons were harder to find, but I did grab some just to make things fair and to make sure that I was being unbiased in it. So let's look at that. The first con is that there's relatively little info or guidance on costs of potions and magic items. I think they did this so that you had more freedom in how you priced things and how you had your players interact with things. And you can take the general average pricing from standard D&D and use it for this, but I would have liked a little bit more guidance on the potion and magic item costs, especially since Obojima uses a different currency system than standard D&D. It only has 3 currencies instead of the normal set that D&D has, and so that would have been a little helpful. The next con is that there's no subclass for cleric or artificer. They did this because of how Obojima works. You don't have deities in Obojima, you have interactions with spirits, and so cleric, it's a little hard to do that. Artificer, maybe it's because it's a newer, relatively newer, I should say, compared to the other ones, newer class. I don't know. I do feel like both of those could have been adapted for Obojima in a similar way that paladins and warlocks were adapted in for their subclass, especially artificers being, you know, with the focus on the 80s, 90s analog tech. If you just scale the artificer back to that time frame, it's a pretty easy one, I think, to add a subclass for. I would have liked to see that personally. The next con is that some characters and locations feel like they needed a little bit more added detail or attention. There's one character that comes to mind. It's this giant worm spirit that you find underground in an abandoned subway station, essentially, or abandoned subway tunnels. And they kind of leave it at, oh, it's this character and he's looking for this, and there's not really any backstory to him. And it does leave it open that you can kind of create your own backstory there. But I just felt like some of these characters and locations could have used a little bit more detail, a little bit more attention to really kind of flesh them out a little bit and incorporate them into the world. Next con is in the mechanics and salvage skills. These are new skills that are added into Obojima for the purpose of interacting with magic items. Both use intelligence, which makes sense, but it feels redundant that you would need both. Mechanics is kind of the idea of you're putting things back together, kind of intuitively knowing how these magic items and these tools work, while salvage is being able to pick out items from broken down machines and reuse them. There is difference, but using intelligence for both and how they're used feels kind of repetitive, in my opinion. I don't really know of a fix for that. Maybe switching how their skills are used, or switching, maybe one can be intelligence, one can be wisdom, or something like that. But it did feel really repetitive, in my opinion. The next con is that it could use some more spirit locations and focus on the spirit world. There's a lot of interaction between the NPCs and the players, between the real world and the spirit world. You have a lot of spirits that are just in everyday life, and there are some spirit locations, but it felt like the spirit locations kind of took a backseat to the real world stuff. And there are ways you can make that work for the story, but with how much of a focus and how much attention was put onto spirits, I feel like it could have used a little bit more focus on the spirit locations that are already there, or on the other end, adding a little bit more spirit locations, a little bit more interaction between the physical world and the spirit world. The final con that I saw with Obojima is that it is only set for D&D 5e. Now, it makes sense that it is because it's based on D&D 5.1, but if you're wanting to adapt it and the setting into another TTRPG system, it's going to take some extra time and effort, quite a bit of extra time and effort, I'd say, into adapting the spells and the magic items and the character option mechanics and all this stuff into whatever system you're using. That is to be expected with a lot of the campaign settings. Most campaign settings that I know of, most of these books are based on one system specifically. So you could say that that's a con for really any of them. But it is something that I see with this, is that you would have to put in extra work if you're wanting to use it for another system. Now that we've discussed the kind of general information of the book and my notes on it, we can look at my personal rating of Obojima. We'll be looking at art and inspiration, how easy it was to read, the mechanics it presents, my personal enjoyment of the book, and my overall rating. Each category is going to be ranked out of 10, and at the end I'm going to average it out and round to the nearest number for my overall rating. And each category is going to have its own notes as to why I rated it that way. Starting out with art and inspiration. Now, typically, these are two categories in how I normally categorize and rate the books. But my notes for both were pretty well the same, so I went ahead and combined them here. For both art and inspiration, it got a 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10 art, 10 out of 10 inspiration. I'm going to be showing some of the art as I'm talking about these notes, just so you can kind of see what I'm talking about, see what's in the book. It was one of the main things that drew me to the book initially. Hopefully it does the same for you. But reading through the book felt like reading through a Studio Ghibli movie or a Legend of Zelda game. There's a lot of whimsy and social interaction in the book, while still having this idea of, okay, there's something very serious that we have to take care of or we have to look into. Specifically, it reminded me of Spirited Away, the Studio Ghibli movie, especially with how much interaction there is and how much camaraderie there is with the spirit world. Legend of Zelda as an inspiration was less focused on, but it's still very evident. Specifically, it reminded me a lot of Wind Waker, more so in how you're interacting with the NPCs than anything else, while still having that, again, that constant thing of, okay, there's something here that we've got to take care of. The next category, stories, covers everything story-wise. It covers the overarching themes and the stories that progress throughout the entirety of the book, as well as the smaller stories between NPCs, their side quests, their hooks, things like that. For stories, I gave it an 8 out of 10. Reason being, I felt that there were some characters and details, specifically in some of the history of the world and the characters, that could have used a little bit more attention or guidance. My main example of this is the cave worm spirit Gamora. Gamora is traveling through these underground railway tunnels, looking for a specific item. I'm not going to say what, don't want to spoil, but they're looking for this item, and it leaves it open to where you can create the quest and how to find this item. You can make it a full campaign or a short one-shot, whatever you want to do. But I would have liked a little bit of backstory on Gamora, who they were before they lost the item, kind of how they got there, things like that. And that can kind of be said for a lot of the history of the world. I felt a little bit more detail would have been nice, and maybe would have been made the writing and the connection a little bit easier at times. But it wasn't enough to really make me lose interest or take me out of the story. On that kind of an opposite note, the story hooks and the quests were very easy to follow and very easily adapted for longer quests. The stories were fun. They're fun adventures. They're fun side campaigns. They're really cool. And they are super easy to adapt into whatever you need them to be. If you need them to be parts of a longer quest or they themselves to be a longer quest, they are left open-ended enough that you can do that and make it a full thing. Or you can adapt some of the larger things into smaller one-shots and take out some detail or take out some extra steps to create a more concise one-shot if need be. The stories were very well created and very well suited to that sort of adaptation, and they were very fun and interesting. The next category is how easy the book is to read and its organization, which I gave a 9 out of 10. I would have given this book a 10 out of 10, except for just one little thing that kind of threw me off. I was unaware that there was a map in the back, so at the start of the book I felt I had to make a map to keep track of everything. Now, this is on me. I could have flipped through the book and flipped to the end and seen that there was a map. But that being said, it would have been helpful if the map that was there was more directly mentioned or was in the front of the book where it was more easily seen. Like I said, it's a fairly minor thing. It's not a huge thing, but it did kind of set me back in reading the book and getting stuff prepped, because I was sitting there trying to make the map, which I did have some issues tracking locations in doing that. So really it just does amount to the fact that it set me back a little bit in my writing, but it wasn't a significant thing. The next category is the mechanics that the book presents, which I gave an 8 out of 10. On the side of the things I liked, I loved the potion brewing mechanics, the shield mechanic, the magic items and magic systems. I thought all of them were very well done, very easy to adapt into other systems. I thought they were creative. They gave good explanations of what each thing did, and they were incredibly fun to keep track of. I also really liked the character options that the book presents. All the all the subclasses presented I thought were really neat. They're really exciting. I'm really excited to see what my players come up with for them. And the reworked or added character species are really neat. I'm just going to say it, Nakudamas are better than Grungs as far as frog characters go. Nakudamas take it by a mile. Grungs, as player characters, nothing in comparison. The character options are fantastic. All of the negatives I see to the mechanics that brought it down from a 10 are relatively small things that kind of just added up and prevented it from hitting that 10 mark. The salvage and mechanics skills felt redundant due to both using intelligence. You didn't really feel like you needed both. The pacify status that the book presents felt kind of unnecessary or underutilized. It's just kind of thrown in there without any explanation of this is how it's used, this is when you would typically see it, this is some ways that it'll fit into the story. It could have had more done with it, and I would have liked to see cleric and artificer subclasses. Like I said earlier, I understand why they weren't added. I understand that within the world of Obojima, they don't necessarily fit in instinctively, But they could have been reworked like the Paladin or Warlock, or even added in as is and just kind of flavor texted differently. I do feel like they could have both fit into the world, and part of it is because every other standard official D&D class has a subclass written for the book, and my completionist self is like, well, why aren't these two? I feel like they could have been added into the world and given subclasses, but I understand why not. So for those smaller reasons, it was brought down to an 8, but I really did love all the mechanics in general. And the final category, enjoyment. I gave this category a 10 out of 10. I was very excited for this book for a very long time. I ordered it soon after the Kickstarter campaign ended, I believe. So I waited a decent amount of time for it. I was excited for it the whole time. And it definitely lived up to and surpassed the expectations I had for it. The book kept my interest throughout the entirety of reading it. I was so heavily invested in the world and the stories and the characters and all this stuff. I was very excited to write the campaign throughout the entire writing process. I loved every part of it. Everything about this book I loved. It was so fun, so cool to read. It was beautiful to look at. I loved every single moment of working with this book. Now, all this gives Obojima an overall rating of 9.16 out of 10, rounded to 9 out of 10. This book was so close to getting a perfect score. I tried to be as fair as I could with everything. Like I said, I love this book so much. I thought it was so fun. It's so interesting. The amount of work and time that was put into it and everything included is fantastic. I really wanted to give it a 10 out of 10, but I felt that would be unfair. That would be an unfair rating considering how I've been rating things so far. So it got a 9 out of 10, which is still a phenomenal score. It's fantastic. Loved every part of it. It's just minor stuff that kept it from getting that 10 out of 10. So there you have my thoughts on Obojima Tales from the Tall Grass. Like I've said throughout the entirety of this video, I loved reading this book so much. It was so much fun. I had so much fun writing a story, a campaign for it. I'm so excited to eventually play it with my party. I've got a really cool party who all have really cool characters they're excited for. It's going to be fantastic. I would definitely encourage anyone to check out this book. Like I said, you can find Obojima on TikTok and YouTube under just the name Obojima. They've got a lot of their information on there. You can find it online to buy it. Definitely check it out. It's so worth it. It's got a bit of everything for everyone. You can add in combat. It's got the role play. It's whimsical. It's got its serious moments. It's just fantastic for long campaigns, short campaigns, all of it. So definitely, I would encourage, check it out. 9 out of 10, fantastic. But that does it for today's video. If you liked everything, be sure to check out all our places: YouTube, Discord, Twitch, TikTok. Check them all out. I do gaming content, TTRPG content, all sorts of stuff. So check it out. Talk with me. I'd love to hang out with y'all. If you like everything, share with your friends, share with your family, share with your neighbors, and share with this guy. That guy, big guy. He's a skeleton shark giant flying thing. I don't know. He just seems like he'd like to talk about these videos. So share with him. As always, thank you all for being here. I greatly appreciate it. Have a great night, great week, great day, great everything. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye, Ghostlings.